Welcome to Dentology, the Business of Dentistry podcast. In this podcast, we delve into the non-clinical aspects of dentistry with inspirational guests from across the profession. You will hear incredible life stories, pick up valuable business tips and be entertained. I'm Andy Acton and I'm joined by my co-host, Chris Drevens. Absolutely fascinating.
That was brilliant. It made me realise the role of the CDO is so much more than a contract, which I think as a non-clinician is my sort of ignorance. And he's a lovely bloke.
But also I think quite often there's a lot of sort of mystique around it, but that managing and juggling, championing patient care, being the voice of the profession, but also an advisor to government, that's not an easy triangle to manage.
No.
And I think Jason's style, his demeanour, his experience and his passion for the profession is the right guy to be doing it. I think there's loads of nuggets in there, not just on Jason and his life and how he's managed so many elements to it, but what he's bringing to the role of CDO.
I think the other thing I think is pretty cool is he's got the practical element of still being a clinician and doing wet-fingered dentistry, which surely has got to inform decisions made, wouldn't you have thought?
I would have thought so.
But I mean, brilliant.
I know he didn't talk about it today, but I've heard him say previously that when he was awarded his MBE, it was presented to him by then Prince Charles, now King Charles III. And Prince Charles back then was surprised that Jason was still working as a dentist.
Wow.
Because you quite often assume that people move on and get involved in policy or
rather
academia.
Than actually being at the coalface.
I think it is a superpower.
I think it's a brilliant strength.
No, it was a fabulous conversation.
They'll enjoy listening, everyone.
Yeah. If you do enjoy what you listen to, please do subscribe because new episodes come out every Monday. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Here we are again.
Another one.
It is.
Another one. Dentology. Don't you love it?
And
exciting today.
Very exciting. It's rare you get to speak to somebody quite early on in a new role. Quite often people are quite well established in their position. So to get those fresh insights of where they are is going to be really interesting.
I think we've been super fortunate.
We have.
Super fortunate. Very honoured.
We are very honoured. Today, we have Dr Jason Wong joining us. And Jason is a dentist, also partner at the Maltings Dental Practice in Grantham.
Okay.
In 2020, awarded an MBE for services to dentistry and oral health.
Flip.
And recently been appointed as interim chief dental officer. Hello, Jason. How are you?
My goodness, what a business card that is.
Hi there, Chris. Yeah, very well, thank you. Yeah, and thanks for that intro.
Good. No, it's delightful to have you with us.
Thank you for coming on.
And just as I go through the list of things you do, I'm agog that you've actually got time to talk to us because you've also got a very busy life running out before you.
Yeah, but no, it's a pleasure to speak to you both, and good to have the conversation. And yeah, I've obviously stacked the rest of the day before and after, but that's situation normal, So no, pleasure to be here. Seriously.
But there is a phrase, isn't there? I think there's a phrase which is if you want something done, ask a busy person.
That's it, yeah.
And there's no doubt that I think the busier we all get, we just become very adaptable and have this ability to squeeze things in because you've got a lot to get through. So I think you're certainly in that phase. But to start with,
master of plate spinning.
Yeah. Could we talk about perhaps the biggest impact on our lives, which is PPE, just to start with, and PPE isn't perhaps where you think it's going. PPE is parents, postcode, and education. I think those are the things that kind of are rocks that put us together. Everybody assumed this is going to be a boring dental chat. They went, PPE, we've had enough of that.
How much does that mask cost?
Exactly. But just thinking in terms of kind of parents, postcode and education, can you kind of give us a sense of your teenage years? What was it like growing up as Jason Wong?
So, I mean, I was at school in Bedford, actually, as a sort of teenager.
Oh, okay.
Boarding school mainly throughout my childhood. So originally from Malaysia. So you're saying about parents. My dad's a GP, and I was sort of sent over from an early age for education purposes. So and so very much enjoyed that time. Until. So
were you over here alone then, Jason, for your education?
Yeah, I had my brothers who were here at the time, but yeah, essentially that was the case. So that was during the holidays. Would see them, but yeah, very much sort of alone I suppose had to be quite sociable as well, because sort of even during holiday times we'd be hanging out with friends, etc. So that was I think that was a good time before obviously going to dental school. I think the standard schooling really.
They always describe boarding school as character building, don't they? Which I think is a sort of an all-encompassing role of boarding school. Is a character building.
The good things and the bad
things. Yeah.
So you then yes, you obviously finished your school. You went to Birmingham Dental School back in '95. I've heard you say before that you said your father's a GP, and you said that you've got a rebellious streak. So you weren't going to be a GP, you're going to be a dentist because you're. Are you the rebellious type?
Well, no, not exactly, but it was a rebellion. So no, I don't think I fall into the rebellious type. But there was this discussion, and I mean, in the early days, we actually lived in this above the surgery. So my dad had practice downstairs and we actually lived upstairs. So I mean, when it came to it, one of the kind of decisions was what was appealing, what could you go and do. There wasn't a massive restriction, but there was a little bit of a rebellion in that. And to this day, I always think when I looked at the options at the time and now, I always think that as a profession we always seem a little bit more down about what it is that we have. I'm very positive about the profession, about what we're doing at the moment. And I know other colleagues, whose children have gone into it, mine haven't, but who think that it's a really good profession to be part of. And part of the issue is, why, if it's such a great profession to be part of, why do we get so down on it really? So at the time it was a fairly naive decision. And yes, a semi-rebellion, if you like, but actually, never regretted that from that moment.
No, rebellion with a small R.
Yeah. One of the things we've seen, actually, isn't it, is we were saying that in the last probably 5 years, there's definitely a much higher impact of dentists in the fact of they start to, we're seeing them feeling better about themselves a bit more. Because we think actually the public is feeling a bit more positive about dentistry than it might have done. Do you think that sort of feels about right?
Yeah, yes, I think. I mean, there's always been a disconnect. So if you ask the public doesn't have a great opinion about the profession, but they have a great opinion about their own dentists. as in, we're not sure about them, but my guy or my girl is okay, but but everything else is not. But I think part of the work I do is to try and improve that perception. I mean, the pandemic has definitely brought the importance of dentistry and oral health well into the limelight. I think for many years it wasn't seen as this crucial part, and because of what happened and how access has gone down, it's massively risen in the public consciousness, the political agenda as well, which is the issue that we always had previously, which was you're trying to push an agenda on a service that provides, we are probably 1 to 2% of the NHS, something in that region, but of course we're trying to push on an agenda to have oral health sort of integrated in all aspects of general healthcare.
And I think it's always a shame. Obviously, we're very fortunate. We get to speak to and see hundreds of dentists a year. Yeah. And it always saddens me when dentists kind of lose sight of the impact they have on patients. It really is a life-changing profession. And when you see people who feel downtrodden or downbeaten because of perhaps external pressures or red tape or bureaucracy, whatever it might be, and they've lost sight of the impact on confidence and well-being and how that person feels about themselves, or their ability to go to an interview and feel more confident, or with their partner, whatever it might be. And when I see dentists, and being non-clinical, arguably it's easier for us to see, but when you see a dentist who's fallen out of love with the profession, it is sad, because it's a phenomenal job. It really is an incredible job to impact people's life and well-being in that way. Totally agree. And I think that part of that is really getting ourselves to see the situation that we're in, and perhaps see things in a more positive light than we have been doing.
but yeah, I think the point you raise about the last 5 years, I think that rather than it's not so much the image, but the importance of dentistry and oral health has definitely gone up, and that's going to impact obviously on sort of frontline services.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because anecdotally, over the years that we've dealt with dentists, you would have had them say, "Yeah, it was almost." They were told, "Well, he didn't make it as a doctor, so you're now going to be a dentist." There was almost that sort of like the undercurrent now. But it's interesting because from a lot of the young guys that we talk to, they didn't ever want to be a doctor. Like they wanted to be a dentist. And I think that's a different change.
Yeah, I think back in the day, the grades necessary to get in was slightly lower. So that's probably where you got that from, which is, grades getting lower. But I mean, the guys nowadays who get into dental school are, straight A students from young age, are very much more academic and not necessarily a brilliant thing. The dental curriculum is very academic in its own right as well. Sorry, I'm getting a call, would you believe, on the phone? Sorry about that. You're in demand.
You're in demand.
Yeah. So I think that's something I think we've got to we've got to look at. Is it absolutely necessary for a dental school course to be so academic, and when 95% of our profession goes into being a general dentist in practice, you have this really highly academic qualification system that then produces someone where the skill set you need actually very much more people skills, practical skills orientated. And there is a slight disconnect there. I understand we want to keep the this issue about having high sort of academic rigor, but there is this question mark in the back of my head that do you need a straight A student to go through in order to care for a population base, for
it's almost a bit like nursing in a way, isn't it? As in not in dental nursing, but in I think that sometimes with nursing is that it's become so academic, whereas actually, as you're saying, Jason, really you want people who are going to care. I mean, I know that you've got to have a certain level, but I think you're right because, and I don't know, and whether you can answer this question, but you might be able to do as a principle. Things that we're told by the guys that we deal with is the practical application of dental school in associates has changed over the years, whereas some of the guys that are coming out now can't do or have had minimal experience of some of the things that someone maybe 10 years ago would have done.
Yeah, I mean, I think the level of sort of clinical experience has dropped a little, but then so have the intervention. But I think mostly, and it's part of the work that I'm sure we'll get onto it that I've been trying to do, which is looking at the culture in which we practice under, as to how people feel about carrying out certain procedures, what they feel the risks are, both to them and the treatments that they're carrying out. So yeah, definitely, I think that it's something that, but it's so the job is so people based. Whether you satisfy what your patient is asking for, what they demand, what they need, as well as how you deal with colleagues and everything else. But actually, when we assess people, whether they can go in, we do it almost purely or sort of predominantly on these sort of academic achievements.
And I think because of the nature of how the kind of schooling and education system works in the UK, people tend to do their GCSEs, their A-levels, and then go straight from A-levels to university. Yeah. So there isn't actually much life experience. It's education, and then you get spat out into the real world. And suddenly now you need to have great communication skills. You need to be able to read people. And there isn't necessarily the broader life experience that goes with that. I remember many years ago, I think it was when Pat Conway was at Birmingham. I remember we talked about trying to do some non-clinical courses with him.
Communication skills.
And he said there just isn't the space. He said the program is so full. There just isn't the space to actually fit anything in other than just getting through the clinical work, and it does feel like there's a gap. And I guess the FD year helps, but it does. At that point you're kind of also kind of trying to hone your clinical experience, but there's a lot to be taken in quite early.
Well, it's like Raj Rattan when we were at a global dental collective or something, and it was lots of young dentists, and it was quite interesting. There was a bit about the GDC and complaints and sort of how to avoid a complaint. And Raj's advice was just build better relationships.
Yes.
He said, build better relationships with your patients, which is back to what you're saying, Jason. You know, understand how to talk to people and deal with people.
Exactly.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what is it? There is a gap, isn't there? This is gap that's, as you say, it's a communication bit which you can teach, but some people have it and some people don't naturally.
Yeah.
And it's a balance.
Yeah.
I mean, you
So
raised the nursing situation, you know, but there is a balance. You know, the question is, in order to care, do you need a degree? I mean, you know, that's one of the issue, and you know, so there is a balance in terms of the workforce. You need those that are doing certain bits that requires that. But yeah, overall, it's something that I think we need to think about, and also distribution. I think across the country in terms of you know, the backgrounds of people, whether, you know, why there's a bigger workforce issue in rural localities and things like that are things that we need to think about in terms of people getting into dental school.
So just back to your career, you come out of Birmingham, and now you're a partner in a pretty significant practice in Grantham. What was your pathway from graduation through to being a partner at Maltings?
Maggie Thatcher. He was really attracted to Maggie Thatcher. She was Grantham, wasn't she?
Well, I think the two things I even know about Grantham is Margaret Thatcher, and it was the first cinema in the country. The first cinema in the country was in Grantham.
The other one I know, that it was named the most boring town in the country
don't
a
say
while
that.
ago. Yeah, sorry about
Yeah,
that,
it was.
Jason.
It
a long
was.
time
No,
ago.
no.
I'm
The
sure
only
it's got a
thing-
lot better now.
The other thing you missed off is Isaac Newton, but apart from that, yes.
I was going to say, I was going to mention that because I was in a train station at Grantham, and there was this whole thing about Isaac Newton, which did surprise me somewhat. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, so
Sorry,
yes,
back
of
to you,
course,
sorry.
You can imagine, background of being born in Malaysia, brought up in London at boarding school. Why would I end up? Well, actually, I mean, I met my wife at dental school. She's a dentist, and when we were in a sort of third and fourth year, her dad sort of sadly passed away. So actually, when we were looking for, at the time, VT jobs, so the foundation jobs, we actually said, well, you know, we'll just, as a initial move, let's go back, make sure her mum's okay. So actually, initially there wasn't this sort of inbuilt thing that was where we're going to live, but we sort of moved back initially and actually have stayed ever since. And I was very happy at the practice that I was at, and it was as you say, a big practice, and stayed on as an associate. And really, I suppose what in this day and age would be seen as quite too early, probably, but within 3 years of qualifying, had taken on the partnership for the practice.
So you did your VT. So you did your VT at the Maltings, then stayed on as an associate, and then became partner. So it was all the way through.
Yeah,
Wow.
all the way through.
Wow.
So
That's really quite a challenge. That's a challenge, though, isn't it? Because you start as a VT to then become and then to become a partner. It's almost a bit like being promoted in house, isn't it? Because everyone remembers you as what you used to be. So that's probably a challenge in itself.
And it happened. And it happened quickly for you as well, didn't it?
It did. Yeah, it did. I mean, I suppose, as you say, quite a challenge. Good job it was all right at the beginning. Otherwise, people remember you for things that you did as a VT. But no, it was fine. And actually, when you look at it, actually, at the time, the practice was run by three guys who were late 50s, approaching 60 years old. Their main concern was whether they could ever retire and offload the place. You know, so that makes you sort of wonder just what changed. You know, when I suggested that I wanted to buy into the practice, hand was bitten off very firmly immediately, and one of them said,
"It's amazing how those times change, isn't it?" Now,
absolutely. Thank God now it means in a few years I can retire. Was what one of them sort of shouted, because at the time, literally, nobody wanted it. At that time, but I suppose
very front foot though. Front foot to ask, Jason. You know, especially when you were, what's that? Probably about. What's that? 26, 27, something like that?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, and yeah, we I also got married and we had our first child all in that same year. So I do remember that year.
So you thought, hey, why not?
Fairly hectic. Yeah, just take everything in one go. So no, that was pretty good. But again, no regrets. The practice is great. We've changed it very significantly, but yeah. So from as you say, FD to associateship to partnership all within quite a short period of time. And I when I speak to young dentists, I always mention that. I said I think I was brought up in sort of simpler times, because when we went through dental school, the kind of objective was to get out, being a dentist, and if you kind of like to buy into the place, if not, you just the sort of the pinnacle and the culmination was being a general dentist in practice. I kind of wonder whether some of the heights that people are aiming for are really, really, a bit too high, that you put so much pressure on yourself. Because that's my recollection in my peer group was that was it. You pass finals, you got there, and once you get and you find somewhere that you like, you buy in. That was really all the high level ambition that we had. None of the quite higher level of fulfillment that people seem to be gunning for right now.
And I think back then, Jason, I think your exposure to people outside of your immediate environment would have perhaps been going to an LDC meeting. That kind, you'd bumped into a few other dentists at a local meeting. So your vision and your exposure. We kind of teaching on the edge of social media here, but it's so much easier to see what other people are doing. And so kind of your aspirations and your ambitions shift based on what other people are doing. Whereas back in your day and back in the day for us, which is kind of pre-digital, you just didn't know these things were happening. So you only had your local community.
There wasn't a pressure
yourself against.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost a peer pressure to do something more. You're quite right. I mean, I joined the LDC quite early on in the day as well, and Lincolnshire being what
Probably
it was.
Brought the average age down.
Oh, definitely, yeah. It was very much the tie, the cravat, and the blazer brigade. That's how, nobody would turn up in jeans for anything like that.
I can almost imagine someone saying, "I think you've come to the wrong room, sir."
I think I was the youngest member of the LDC. I became the youngest secretary they'd ever had, and I think sort of 8 years later, I was still the youngest member of the LDC. But that might have been just us. But I mean, things are probably a bit different. But yes, you're quite right. That was how, and going to meetings, meeting up with colleagues. That was the conversation. That was what we're doing. And but yes, that's kind of how I progressed really at that time.
So the practice you've now got 12 surgeries, 14, 15 clinicians, the support team that goes with that. Given all the other things you do within dentistry, what's your secret sauce for managing a practice? Because obviously you've got lots of calls on your time, but you've obviously been there as a partner for quite a while. I know you have a partner who works with you, but how do you manage that? How do you divide that up?
Yeah,
I still not look knackered.
Well, yeah, I think there's sometimes I do get the pressure on, you need to be here for this or things like that. And I am there clinically, of course, but there's also running the practice. So, I think very early on I worked out you needed to be able to delegate and needed to have the right people in the right places. So when people say, "Oh, have you got," when I first started, some people didn't have practice managers. I mean, they used to have all their paperwork in piles in their kitchen table and work till 11 o'clock to do stuff, and some even cleaned their own practice and stuff like that. But actually, I think you nowadays, unless you're really small, you'd find most practices have a manager. We have three effectively. So we have a conventional sort of practice manager who's worked for us, promoted sort of from within. She was our head receptionist. We have again promoted from within a head nurse that's become our sort of clinical lead. So she makes sure that clinically all the compliance staff, CQC staff, PPE, you were saying at the beginning, everything is down to her, how the things is rotated. And then more recently when the number of partners sort of began to drop, we brought in, again, promoted from within, a business manager from who is our head receptionist, and I say to her that her role is just to make sure we keep alive, basically. So she sort of crunched the kind of numbers and do that. And I have to confess, I'm not a business person. I don't think I am. Obviously, I own the business, as you say, and there's 49 people that work with us in one form or another. But I very much was of the school of thought that, you know, if you do the right things, give the service that people want, then you'll be okay. I recognise it's a lot more complicated than that right now. But I'm very much in the space of, I'm a clinician and I try not to let the business side affect it. Obviously, you have to, because in order to survive. So the way that I deal with it is we literally employ these three ladies who work for us, who've been promoted from within. They have their roles. They do that. We meet up with them once a week, to run through the management and very much try and delegate that leadership down to them, with only, although they do stray from that, with only the very critical stuff that they feel they can't do for the two of us to intervene. So
it sounds like a great system. It sounds like a great system.
I suspect it's the only way that you're. Yeah, I suspect it's the only way that it could work for me, just because if, sometimes I work within the practice so that I can be there, taking calls and things, but I could be there to give answers and support, but mostly it's done through that, and it's probably the only way it would work.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we quite often talk to practice owners and we say to them, the next thing you need to kick on is to actually create this management role so as it frees you up. But quite often they won't do it. They won't do it because either quite often financially they don't want to spend the money, and they don't want to lose that control. But we say it's the only way you can really kick on, because ultimately you've only got certain hours in the day. So it's,
And I think there's also two things. I think one, it's acknowledgement that you spent 5 years at dental school learning how to be a really good dentist. You're not naturally business people. And that doesn't mean you can't become good business people, but filling that gap with other people that understand business is a good thing to do.
Definitely.
But I think you also need to, and you've nailed this, you need to understand the art of delegation. So that's not abdication. It's not getting somebody to do the job and keep interfering. It's not kind of keep picking over the small stuff. It's genuinely putting in place good people and then getting out the way. And I think when you do that, I think you actually create more time for yourself. How many clinical days do you do, Jason?
So, I mean, of course, that's just changed with taking on this new role.
Sure.
Previous to that, it was two and a half. But now I'm probably down to one and a bit.
But without that management structure, there's no way you could have done 2.5. So having that, it actually frees you up to do the bit that you're most qualified for.
Yeah,
so it's a smart thing to do. And I think quite often people who own practices, they find the business bit quite stressful because they're not equipped for it to the same extent. When they're in the surgery, they're in flow. They're trained for it. They know what they're doing. They're working with their nose. They're treating a patient. That's what they really, really love doing. It's when they step out of the surgery, it becomes harder work. So having that management system.
I'm saying the nonsense is that is the bit they don't like, but they won't recruit someone to do that bit to take it away from them.
That's what I was meaning, and it was a true story that I back in the day would walk in to see friends who own their own practice, usually smaller practices, and their kitchen table is stacked up with stuff. And I then turn around and I say, look, so what are you doing? Well, 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, they're still doing stuff in order to save, obviously, the cost of bringing someone in to do it. We had a practice manager. Well, we promoted a practice manager actually not long after I joined the partnership. And that was the first one that we had. So even back in those days, the partners did quite a lot. But I do believe in that. And I believe in that even with the work that I do with the office now, which is, you need to make sure you try and find good people, and then make sure, and it's a really thin dividing line between having delegation and abdication or trying to have control. That is a real issue. I'm not suggesting I get it right all the time, but I try and get it right all the time is probably where I'm coming from.
Mm, mm. Before we get to the your most recent role in dentistry as CDO, in the introduction we said that you got a well-deserved MBE for your services to dentistry and oral health, which took you to Buckingham Palace. Most people in their lifetime are not going to go to Buckingham Palace, and to take your family there must have been an incredible day.
Yeah. I mean, it was a special day. I mean, it was utterly unexpected. People would have asked me about it, and at the very first thing that I got, I really thought it was a prank. But then I couldn't work out. Who on earth would put in the effort to play a prank like that on me. That was the
Did you get a letter? Is that how it happened? Did you get a letter, Jason?
Yeah, I got a letter, and the letter wasn't. It wasn't that grand. I mean, it was from the chemicals, and it looked like something, if you spent a few moments on Word and you could work out. So my initial response.
Did you expect some footman to appear on horseback with a scroll? Is that what you were expecting?
Better quality paper. No, the final thing had better quality paper or whatever, all that kind of stuff. No, I don't know what to expect. I mean, it wasn't on my radar. I genuinely, and it wasn't on my radar. And I still to this day don't know who put me up for it. I'm told that it started in a local sense because of the work that I was doing on oral health in Leicester, but obviously others did. So yeah, very, very sort of special to find that out. In terms of going to Buckingham Palace, it's a bit of a surreal story because I think it was March the 11th, 2020. That was when so it was the New Year's honours, but 2020.
No. Oh, excellent.
So if you are very, very good at recollecting, you will know that we were on the verge of lockdown. This was the very last session that they did. Actually, they didn't necessarily know that at the time. London was deserted
just before Paddy's Day.
Yeah,
So London was virtually deserted. Obviously, we were in this hall for sort of 90 odd people, 100 people, and yeah, as you say, it was a very special day. Incredible, really, and it still seems a little surreal, as I said, because I had no part in knowing, kind of anything about it at all until it landed, really.
Wow.
No, well deserved. Well, I mean,
thank you.
Yeah, your well, I think your MBE is testament to your commitment to dentistry and also the work that you've done with the local dental networks and
years at the LDC. That's what it was.
but also that those environments require people like you with strong opinions to voice them, and those opinions come from a good place to better the profession. Do you think we're moving into an environment where it's becoming harder to share your opinion, particularly with online bullying, trolling, cancel culture type stuff? Is it getting harder for people to stand up for something and be prepared to have those opinions, perhaps like you had in the early part of your career and still today?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the role that I've got at the moment is to try and sort of enhance and develop local leadership, so people who eventually, hopefully, will replace us now. So I think that it is, and it depends which aspect. So I mean, I think that there is an environment where that it seems like if you disagree on something, that somehow the torrent and the abuse kind of has to go with it, and I don't see why that is. And the phrase of you can disagree without being disagreeable is something that I do mention to people because I just don't see any reasoning for it. So I think there are two aspects. I think one is I think there's no excuse for, as you say, the sort of the cancel culture, the very extreme kind of views that you can't hold that view. And trying to do that, but there's a different level, which is if you have a view and which someone disagrees with, and suddenly it becomes a personal attack line, which sort of when someone's trying to the positivity thing. I mean, I've been called ridiculously positive, I think was one phrase, and people almost say you can't possibly do
ridiculously positive.
That sounds like a compliment to me.
No, and if you try and do affect anything in the system, it is supposedly you're rearranging the deck chairs whilst the Titanic goes down. It's kind of that kind of thing. And I just think, well, we should, as a profession. I mean, a professional should be able to have a view. I mean, that is the instance. So trying to get a group of professionals should be quite difficult, because it's a bit like herding cats, isn't it? So everyone should be able to have that view. And I think that you should be able to enhance that view. You should then be able to debate those. But I think you're right. I think it is becoming more difficult, and social media is probably the reasoning for it. Partly because it voices the extreme views. So by its very nature, it doesn't give voice to the moderates. So most people sit in that moderate. But even, I don't know whether there are updated figures, but something like only 5% of people actually ever comment. So you've got 95% of people who actually look, and probably of that view. And then, of course, you've got the counter arguments, which comes from the two sort of extreme wing of that argument. Yeah. And of course, that then goes on, and then you create this culture which then tells people what they can and can't think. I don't see why, I don't see why that's necessary, if I'm honest. But I've never been able to see that. I just think, you should just sit around. Sorry?
I remember when I went at my school, we did we had debates. It was part of our curriculum to have a debate with the rest of your class. And in a way, you think, well, why aren't? I mean, I presume schools maybe don't do it, but it is to try, and it's okay to have opposing views, as you say, Jason. It's when it all gets horrendously personal because you're fat or whatever it is. It's not
but also,
good.
I think it's healthy, because if all you do is surround yourself with people that share the same view as you, how are you ever going to broaden your knowledge or your experiences or get different perspectives that might help you put you on a better path or a different direction? If it's as binary as you agree with me or you're wrong, that's hopeless.
It is.
There's nowhere in between.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, I've always felt, and this is even before the sort of the equality, sort of diversity agenda became sort of more prominent, was that you do need the diversity of thought in order to make the right decisions. Because, as you say, everyone's sort of life experiences are slightly different, and if you surround yourself with people that have the same views and have the same background, maybe, and everything else, then you aren't going to have that diversity of decision making, which is what's going to, at the end of the day, whether in business or whether in sort of policy terms and working for the NHS and with the Department of Health, that actually you're not going to be able to give a good decision making and good advice if you don't have that diversity of thought within your own teams.
And as you say, life in general. For just living your daily life, isn't it?
Exactly. So just changing tack slightly. In June 2020, you joined the office as deputy CDO. June 2020 was an incredibly interesting time to join the office, because I guess we were just coming out.
Was it before or after the 8th of June?
Yeah, I was going to say it was 23rd of March to the 8th of June was when everybody downed tools. Just what was the sense of the office at that time? Was it in turmoil? Were there challenges? Were you coming in as kind of a fresh face that was able to bring some new energy to a team that was feeling a bit knackered?
That's a good question.
Or a scapegoat.
So just to clarify, and my interview was on the 8th of June.
Oh, no, excellent.
So at lunchtime, where
did you say in your interview, "Give me the job, I'll have dentistry open by tomorrow"? That's what you should have said.
No, dentistry was open that day. So I mean, it was interesting because obviously now, I mean, you had to ask for approval for me to speak to you, but at that time it was great. So in the morning, I was speaking to Radio Lincolnshire about the reopening of dentistry in Lincolnshire in the press. I then did emergencies, non-AGP emergencies throughout the morning, and then at lunchtime I broke and I had my interview for the role at lunchtime, and then went back to a few more emergencies and finished the day. So I remember the day pretty well. So, and then of course
it was a diverse day.
It was a diverse day, but that is kind of how I've operated for many years. And it was quite a few years ago. One of the medical directors at the time that I reported to said to me, and I think he said this in order to get me to take on a bigger area and a more role, more time to the role, was diversity in your work. Actually leads to longevity of your career. So what he was trying to say is, you only give a day a week to me. I want to give 2. Now, whether he said that as a way of making me, take that on or not, but actually he did have a point, because when things get tough in one end, when you change, it's not quite a holiday. But actually, the complete change of environment and where you're at actually does give you a little bit more kind of sort of energy and approach to it. So I think that is a massive advantage that I've got that. And I remember at tough times when I was working with regional local commissioners, they would actually say, "Oh, you've got tomorrow you go back to the practice. Lucky you." But then on the other hand, dentists think that you're only at work if you've got patients sitting in front of you. This is one of the things that our profession does, which is really weird. So I've actually, after many years, finally sort of got it out of my staff that as I walk out the door, it's not "have a nice day off tomorrow." I'm actually, that's what they're thinking.
It's funny you say that, Jason. The amount of dentists, if I speak to my phone and say, "What have you been doing today?" They say, "Oh, I've not been working." And I always say to them, "You mean you've not been seeing patients?"
I know.
I always pick them up on it, because it's exactly that they say working means I'm in the surgery with a handpiece. But there's a load of things that you have to do to run a business or run a team or CPD, whatever it might be, that doesn't require you to be in the surgery. I think I think there's a flaw in dentists that they always say that's work.
And in reference to your earlier point about, and I was saying about friends that did that, for some reason they didn't see that after dinner they sat down for 2 hours doing the practice books rather than delegating that as not working. If you'd asked them to see an evening session of patients, which they would probably earn quite handsomely, they would look at you and say, "Are you kidding?" I'm not going to do that. But sitting at home, whilst your family goes to bed, trying to do stuff, just doesn't seem like work. So yeah, no, it was definitely sort of a diverse day. And the approach that I took with it was, at the time, it was a 2.5 day kind of job, so I could sort of split my week accordingly. I was already working 2 days for the NHS in the Midlands as a local dental network chair, so it wasn't a sort of huge change in terms of time commitment. There was an extra half day I had to find. So that's kind of June. Your other question about what was I would say I think coming into a team, and I hope they don't mind me saying this, and I have said it, it was a team that was pretty sort of traumatized by the events of the previous three months, I would say, since the lockdown,
which is understandable.
It is. I mean, it was an unprecedented time for them, and I think quite often the profession doesn't understand who makes the decisions and what the processes are and how things get released and all the rest of it. But I mean, it is. I mean, from my own part, during that the sort of suspension of face-to-face, actually, I found myself, whilst I might have gone to the practice upstairs, was probably working 10, 11 hours for the NHS, as a side thing. So, and I still, for a while, would always remember that very first meeting. I say to the lady, "This is nothing bad, but your faces come to my face. It come to my brain every so often, because every morning at 9 o'clock we had a meeting where the whole team would do, and we were trying to set up 90 urgent dental care centres across the Midlands. We were trying to set up workforce redeployment. We were trying to set up PPE to practices and all those kind of things. So at a smaller scale, more regional scale, I know what they they'd kind of been through. They were slightly short-staffed already, so my role had been vacant for about sort of a year to 18 months, I think it was. So they probably hit that, and it's always, you don't know this thing's coming around the corner because if you did, you would have, it would have been something you took into place. And I suppose there was an expectation that I would bring in with the experience, things that would relate to practice more, which I still think I do bring that sort of aspect. Because one of the questions people ask, well, is it moving from deputy sort of part-time to 4 days a week effectively as interim senior, is it a conflict of interest? And I asked that question. It's not seen to be by the system, and it's not seen to be a huge advantage, neither is it seen to be a problem either. But the one edge that it does give me is for example, I think when quite often if you go into a room of policymakers, there's virtually no other working clinician within that room.
No,
even the ones that represent the profession.
Yes,
if you can. So I think it gives them that kind of that ability to say, to be able to say, well, actually, this is what the workforce is finding. The other thing is you can write whatever policy, but quite often it's a binary decision by the practice owner how they decide to act. So, for example, if you want to increase access, you need to come up with policies that satisfy a practice owner that says, yes, I will open my books to accept more. So you can have the most beautiful written policy of need and demand and everything centrally, but if it doesn't hit in the right place, you've got the issues that we can see right now. The sort of the access and where the profession's at. So definitely, I think that was the case. I also was invited to take part in the webinar by the GDC. There was lots of people on it, and one of the comments that people thought that I made, which was, I didn't have a problem. I didn't have a worry about resilience of dental practices and the dental businesses, but I did have a worry about the resilience of the dental workforce, about exactly where that was headed. And the reason I made that comment was well, it was genuinely what I thought. The very first piece of work, in fact, before I was actually in post, after I'd been appointed, I was asked to do was to run the report. You may not have seen it. It's about the resilience of dental practices after the wave one, the COVID, and that was in response to, again, people were saying that dentists were going to go out of business, that there was 70% in financial trouble, all that kind of thing. So I was asked to do a report for the minister and for the office at the time, and we looked into it, and actually, with the support, as it turned out, actually some businesses actually had a pretty good year financially. As a result of it, whereas the jungle drums was that somehow we're going to go under, which is, by the way, unhelpful. If you start a rumor that dental practice are going to go under, it's not going to help them try and get a loan from a bank, is it? I mean, I think that was the issue that we had at the time. So it was that aspect, that I could come not just with opinions, but actually real life experience, as to say, look, this isn't the situation, and hopefully sort of carried that through even now. Although, as you would have noticed,
makes it real world, doesn't it? I think, which is so important. You're dead right. There's so many people who make policies who have no idea what actually goes on. Your comment about the fact of there's no point producing a policy that nobody can implement, because either they can't implement it or don't want to implement it, is a waste of time. Whereas you've got that beautiful foot in both camps where you can say, look, if you presented this to me, I can tell you I wouldn't do it.
I was going to say, it's interesting you say that there kind of isn't a conflict, but there wasn't seen to be a benefit. I think you living and being part of a partnership in the practice, I see that as a massive benefit, because like you say, the amount of times that people dream up what they think is going to be a great idea, and you turn around and say it's cobblers, that is not going to work. People will not do this. That's not going to happen. And you might as well nip it in the bud than it go through a long process of policy and sign off, and then get disseminated down to dentistry, and then you realise it's not going to work. So I think there's huge value of having that skill.
Don't you? Then anything else you did, which is but do you remember that thing they did first of all? That was rubbish. So you're sort of tainted, aren't you, if you're not careful?
Yeah.
No, it's great. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah.
To have you still wet fingered, because I think that makes a difference, because you can say, well, actually, guys, that's not going to work.
I tell you what would be useful, Jason, is we get lots of people who listen to this that they're not clinicians. They work in dentistry, but they're not clinicians. And it might also be useful for some clinicians as well. But I think there's a common misunderstanding that the CDO is responsible for the NHS contract. Could you just explain the role of the CDO and where this sits in relation to the NHS, just to kind of put a baseline of where we're at? I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand exactly where that role sits.
Yeah, and I can understand why that is, but you're quite right. People don't. So, I mean, as a post, it is seen by the system as the sort of the appointment as the head of the profession, providing clinical leadership, but actually in terms of the responsibility for producing, it sits very much within clinical policy. So as to what should go on, what is good for patients, and what is the right sort of policy to have clinically. Now, of course, you don't then go in that. It's not completely isolated from contracts, etc. But you're quite right. The popular misconception is that the CDO is responsible for contract reform. Is obviously not right. It's a little bit more correct in the devolved nations, funnily enough, but not the way in which we're structured here. So the equivalent for medicine is actually the CMO, who's Chris Whitty. Now, I'm not sure anyone has ever tried to attack Chris Whitty for GP contracts, right? I don't think that, and you don't necessarily make that relationship there, but actually that is the situation that we have. Now, as an office, we've got a responsibility, and one of the things I'm trying to change, which we're going through it internally at the moment, is that we need to have a narrative that actually explains that as well. In that, it's not that we don't, have a view or don't try and do things to improve the situation as regards contract. It's the fact that it isn't mine to deliver, it isn't ours to deliver, but I will tell you, the views on how certain things are, and lots of opinions about how bad things are and what isn't working, but not so much about what the alternative could be. And even now, after 17 years or whatever it is of talking about it, it's still, you still sit a group of people together and you won't get one unison sort of voice from everyone. So you're right.
It's a very easy game to play, isn't it? Picking holes in things is a very easy game to play.
Yeah. Everyone can be
rather than giving creative solutions.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone could be a critic, and I think we need to be aware of also. We talked about the priority of oral health in general health and where it is and how it's risen, but we need to be aware of that. So the role is very much we give clinical advice. Both system reform we do, but also, sort of the professional leadership, the regulation piece, in terms of how the workforce well-being, I think is very much part of what we do. But again, the NHS has a workforce training and education directorate that we work closely with. So it's all those things together. The jargon is that we have sort of system leadership, which basically means you're not in a position to be able to take responsibility for that, but it is something that you want to try and influence for the betterment. And in terms of advocacy, the advocacy for the patient does come ahead of advocacy for a profession. So it's quite right that I will stand up for the profession and everything else. But in terms of the policy work, in terms of what we do, has to be, the patient sort of comes first in that aspect. But, my week is...
I'd imagine you...
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
I was going to say, Jason, I imagine you have to be quite thick-skinned, because the comments that we heard from people about Sarah You know, as you say, you end up becoming the target for people's frustration and ire, don't you? It must be quite hard to in effect over the years you've probably managed to develop this brilliant compartmentalization that sort of says it's not about me, it's not about me. But it must be quite painful at times. I'd have thought of people just what they say.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and it's not great, and there's no point pretending that is. And as you say, you know, when the abuse suddenly gets sort of personal, and then people sort of make stuff up, and then you just think, well, you know, we really shouldn't be there. So very much, yeah. That I you know, that I'm sure that's coming down the track when you change position. I'm sure that is, and it's part of the reason
You're waiting.
It's part of yeah, and actually, I mean, to be fair, it's part of the reason why my wife is you know who's been supportive throughout, was never really 100% about me taking on this role, or even the previous role, just because of, you know, the fact that obviously I've got other things that I could be doing.
You're in the firing line.
Yeah. But then, you know, if for me, it's all about whether I can make changes to improve things. I think if I didn't, this isn't, you know, I'm not in it to sit here in the position and say, oh, you know, this is great to be there. The day that I'll walk away is the day that when I just think there's no more I can do, there's no more I can change. I think that's probably the issue. So I think the people who've got to, in terms of, you were saying about people not necessarily clinicians who are in the business. Yeah, it you know, we do have a role for advocating. We deal with the industry, and in fact, we're the only organisation that has sort of that sort of helicopter view of everything. You know, in terms of both dealing with that, you know, there's other aspects. You know, Dental Schools Council, on the other hand, the NHS has this mega structure that we are a part of. So we're part of the medical directorate of NHS England, so reporting to Steve Paris, but also the role has a part to play with the department. Even though we're hosted by NHS England, we actually have a role to play with the Department of Health and Social Care. So, you know, where Minister you know, come up with a policy with input into that, and the discussions that we have. So, you know, over the last, even since being in post for, I think it's about 6 weeks now, we're working on certain aspects regarding amalgam, about legislation for in terms of clinical negligence, legislation for professional registration and things like that. So all those things are going on, which is not what people think that the CDO is actually doing. You know, we during the pandemic, there's lots about going back to, you know, the infection prevention control, how things were operating in dental practices, and how what the NHS wants for primary care was actually, you know, sort of being applied across the piece. So we're one part of that great big system, and it is sometimes, I think, misunderstood as to, you know, we have a section that deals with system or contract reform. You know, we have someone within the team that's leaning in to help that, but actually it isn't massively sort of core business in terms of what we have to do, because it's, you know, so much sort of in terms of wide ranging. You know, we get pulled into things like, you know, water fluoridation. Soon there'll be things suddenly sort of occur out of blue. At the moment, there's a rise in syphilis cases in the population as a whole, which have oral manifestations in the mouth. So that's something that we're leaning into as to whether we need to recommunicate and things like that. So this is just, you know, in the last few weeks, and you know, wanting our advice on policies they're going to go through, and giving advice back on that. That is actually what I spend most of my time sort of dealing with. Even though, as I said, it's, you know, understanding that contract reform is a big part for the profession, but also there's more to it, and we've been doing quite a bit of work as well on sort of culture and a safety culture and just culture and a blame culture. And again, it's an area I think we've got wrong.
Wow.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because people go on about the NHS, etc., but actually that applies to NHS and private. And there's a big part of dentistry that is private currently. And I know that the private dentists are saying, well, the CDO don't represent them. Well, actually, officially, the CDO does. Because of its position, DHSC have a role to play in both. Whereas we reach a point where the people we normally work with at the NHS, where their remit stops, and they genuinely stop. They don't even stray into that, because that's not us. And then we have to then take that on with people that are dealing with sort of private dentistry. And in terms of just culture and all that kind of thing, that applies equally. Possibly more actually in private dentistry, in terms and professional regulation as well. The ones that the CQC takes.
It's a massive umbrella,
action.
isn't it?
It
Really,
is.
as opposed to everyone sort of thinks it's about the contract.
Yeah,
but it's not. That seems, and I don't know. This is probably not the right thing to say, but it's a small part of the actual whole role.
Well, I'm just thinking as you're talking, Jason, I'm seeing you as being the champion of patient care. You're the voice for the profession. You're an advisor to government, but not a civil servant. You were saying that the CDO sits with Professor Sir Steve Paris. So does the agenda come down onto you from central government, or does it come from the profession up through you, or is it a bit of both?
I think it's a bit of both. And in terms of sort of professional accountability, obviously to the medical director, Steve Powers, as you say, but actually he tends to be, sort of not setting the agenda for dentistry. That tends to come from either the NHS chief executive and indeed the government and ministers that tends to come along. In terms of what we take on, quite a lot of it is from the ground up as well. So, the pieces of work that I took in, the patient safety bits, the dental loss, which is going to be released this week, were things that I brought into the office. We've been kind of pushed into, so at the moment we're contemplating a policy document on dental tourism, in terms of what people have done. It might not just be dental tourism in the end, but there's pressures coming from all parts of the system. And again, the central policy inside NHS England may decide that it's not something they want to get involved in, but I think that almost certainly it will end up on our work plan, where we're going to start to give advice as to where the responsibility lies, because you see a lot of that problems coming up more and more within general practice right now. There's two aspects. There's one which is to say, what responsibility does the NHS have? So in other words, if someone comes back with a mouthful of implants and runs into trouble, does the NHS have a role in restoring that, or does the NHS have a role in restoring health? Probably is restoring health. But then on the other hand, it probably won't be limited to that, because private practice coming into the NHS will have a part to play. But the second thing is actually, in terms of the culture, this is what I mean. They could come back to a private practice in this country, and of course you'll see this if you monitor social media. Someone goes, "Oh, this has come back from such a place," and everyone says, "You touch it, you own it." I mean, have you seen that? Right?
Yeah.
You touch it,
Yeah.
I mean, what?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
I understand there's risks, and we need to somehow mitigate that risk, but don't forget there's a patient at the end of the door. That you may blame them for having gone abroad, but where does the healthcare profession takes its very first line, "You touch it, you own it"? In other words, run from this, because if everyone ran from it, what does the patient do? And that is a major issue, I think, for our profession, in terms of we've become so defensive in what we do that we actually end up, I've got associates who I try and talk through, but they are updating notes throughout their lunch hours and after work. We, even during, you were saying earlier about COVID, we were the only profession that seemed to be writing in our notes, this is COVID threat level, whatever, the CDO letter, whatever, PPE. The rest of healthcare just got on with it. But we thought somehow writing this essay was going to protect us, which it doesn't, by the way. So you've got this mega issue where
It's interesting, isn't it?
And where does this culture of defensive dentistry come from? Is it being taught in dental schools?
Is it GDC?
Is it GDC? Is it insurers? How have we found ourselves in a situation where people are fearful?
Yeah. Touch it, you own it.
Yeah.
So I won't touch it.
I think part of it, I mean, obviously it's been looked into quite a bit, and there was a time, when people were very sort of scared of the regulator. They probably are still scared of the regulators as it is. So there is setting a tone. GDC has obviously tried to make steps to try and what they call sort of upstream things to try and treat it. It came from two main causes that we could identify. One was well-meaning, and I'm sure highly skilled general dental practitioners going into dental schools for the final years and supervising the students and telling them about, the fact that they'll probably get sued several times and will probably end up in front of GDC, and that's highly likely. The figures don't bear that out, but that's what they've been told. The second is then in FD, again, that message is then reinforced. And also the indemnity company, and I've been having conversations with them, have a bit of a responsibility here because they are often brought in to give the lecture on dental negligence and things like that. And especially during the online versions, you try and hook people into your 2.5-3 hour lecture by giving the kind of the story that's going to grab their attention, and of course
the mega story,
the mega story, and of course, and I've been trying
to clickbait headline,
So I've been trying to talk to them as well, and a few of them have already promised not to do that. So that culture sort of sets up, and once it sets up, it's really quite difficult to remove. I've been trying to remove it in several ways since I've been in post. One is we got the indemnity companies to all sign up to that statement. I don't know whether you saw, where basically it says if you've got the problem, call us. If we don't open the case, we're not going to charge you sort of frequent flyer miles for it. In other words, we should be your first port of call. You could call 20 times to inquire, 2 times, because again, social media is telling people if you make that call, your fees are going to go up next year. So people are left asking the question. And honestly, it takes all my willpower not to get involved.
Lawyer, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Because sometimes people, again, some well-meaning, some not, give advice over those kind of forums, and you just look at it and you think, my God, you can't. But if I spend every moment of my time trying to correct that, I won't do any work. I've just been doing that the whole time.
Yeah.
So that's one aspect. And the second thing is to try and communicate out that, actually the chances of being up in front of the GDC is actually quite low. Chances of the ultimate section are actually really low. The high risk things that you do is not this. The single case, this idea of a single case, going all the way through is actually a myth. There are very, very few single cases that go all the way through. And some of the work that I've been able to do as policy is, not long after I came in, we agreed that removing the wrong tooth extraction from the never event list, which I think is a good thing. One of the worries that the press team had, which was, we don't want to communicate that dentists don't care about it. So no, we definitely don't. We want to make sure that it's a serious event, but people need to know what to do. Now, the interesting thing is, if you actually take out the wrong tooth, it is a serious event, but it's not career ending, right? Most people actually think it probably is, but it's not career ending. There is no one who have taken out the wrong tooth that has then followed up the procedure correctly that have ended up in the end stage of the GDC. But the GDC is aware of a few cases where that happened, but it's actually the subsequent action to cover up what someone has done that's ended up with them at the late stage.
Yeah. It's the
Now,
problem.
if they weren't
So
fearful in the first
it wasn't
place,
the initial action.
No.
It was a follow-up. Yeah,
the follow-up about, trying to cover up or whatever. But if the individual wasn't in the first stage actually fearful of the consequences,
Yeah, definitely.
they wouldn't actually have done the cover-up. So trying to change that culture is actually to say we need a better recording system, reporting system. So you have all these sort of conversations so that the profession can see. It will take a bit of time, but I think we've made good first steps.
Jason,
I never thought of that as the CDO, as part of the CDO. Did you?
No.
And you're mentioning it, I'm thinking, flip.
It's a really powerful
it's
part.
a wide and varied sort of job, isn't it?
Are you familiar with Black Box Thinking by Matthew Syed, Jason?
Yeah.
So the concept is that when the black box comes out of the aeroplane, they share that data across the whole of the aero industry, so everybody learns in real time what happened, so it doesn't happen again. It would be lovely if there was a culture within dentistry that allowed people to be more open about their failures and their failings without fear of reprisals from insurance companies or the GDC or whatever. Because ultimately, I genuinely believe that people are out there trying to give good patient care, but sometimes things go wrong. But if we have a culture where people feel they have to hide it because of how they're going to be treated, it doesn't move us all forward. And I love that concept of the air industry where everybody gets to share that information in real time, and everybody just moves forward together. But it doesn't sound like we're there yet.
No, we're not there yet, but we're making first steps. So the NHS has brought out a recording system. It's still probably a bit clunky for dentistry because it doesn't get very far before they ask you about bed sores and whether the patient died. But we need to, part of the role is to try and develop that and really change how we approach things. Black box thinking is part of it. The patient safety stuff, the other books. And in fact, the NHS has itself a curriculum on this. So as you've just seen in the recent case of the Lucy Letby case, when you can have cultures build up. And at the moment in dentistry, that culture is a really defensive one. And the reason why it's within the remit, and I'll make this point, is people talk about system reform. Actually, we need to look about not just contract reform, actually why some people perhaps don't do as much clinical work as they otherwise would do, why some people finish a bit earlier than they did, and why some people feel that the system doesn't support them in that. And part of that is the fear culture. A big part of that is if you are coming into work and thinking that somehow something is going to get you at some point, it isn't going to help you perform at your best. And the agreement, and the GDC agrees with this entirely, which is if anyone that turns up to work to try and do good and try and treat patients, GDC should be nowhere on their radar at all. It just should not feature. You just go on with work. Yes, it's still a stressful profession. There'll be things that you need to address, but that is what we're going to change. I don't know. It's a combination of a whole load of factors that have led us to probably from 2010 to get to where we are. But
that dripping tap effect means that we're going to lose people earlier from the profession. With that dripping tap effect of that feeling, we might get another 5-7 years of people continuing to enjoy their clinical dentistry and delivering patient care. But if they feel that there's this kind of building pressure and I've got to get out before the problem happens type attitude.
Like a stalactite, isn't it, really? It's just grows and grows and eventually drops off.
Yeah.
But if you're always thinking that's how it's going to be,
I think regulatory-wise, I think the situation has actually changed. There are still going to be cases, and there's still going to be things where I think the things, if you go back 10 years, how things are treated now to 2013, I think things have changed. I think, but some of the legislation that underpins, the clinical negligence systems and things that we do are older than the NHS itself. And I think that somehow it's quite adversarial. People sometimes talk about the New Zealand system where something goes wrong and then suddenly you literally would have a form that you get the patient. You say, actually, this has gone wrong. I perforated. This is how much compensation you are allowed to have as a result of this. Hand that over, sign, and it's done. And something like that should be here, but at the moment we're not quite there.
It would stop those law firms that shall remain nameless, who basically pursue dentists, the stories you hear, we're not coming after you. We're just doing some research for. Oh, actually, now we've seen your notes, we are coming after you. It's just that it doesn't build a great culture.
And like you say, it's nice to hear that whole culture piece is forming part of your role as CDO.
Yeah, amazing, actually.
We've mentioned contract reform a couple of times, and I don't really want to dwell on that. But just last week, Eddie Crouch, chair of the BDA, was on Radio 4, and he was talking about the situation as it is at the moment, and saying how yes, moving away from UDAs would be a good thing. A general better pay rate for dentists. There was a £400 million underspend on dentistry, and dentists are leaving the NHS. They're not striking, and he was saying there was talk of a dental recovery plan. Where is it? Without getting bogged down in the detail of NHS contract reform, just from where you sit in the office, do you think small change is harder than big change? We've seen some small things and some tinkering with the contract, but do you think big change is something that's easier just to deal with as opposed to just these constant small bits?
Yeah, I'm not sure I do. I think that, well, any change it seems enormously difficult, if I'm going to be honest. But yeah, and seems to take an absolute age. So yeah, I acknowledge that. But no, I don't think so. And
so against that backdrop, though, if we accept that change is hard, does it make more sense, given it's hard, small or big? Does it make more sense to go for big change than have the same pain and make small changes?
Well, I think that the problem with that is what they've been trying since 2010. So, you had the select committee report.
True, pilots, proto-pilots.
Yeah. 2008. Jimmy Steele then did the excellent report in 2009. The government then did announce. The government then did announce. During the next Parliament, we will have contract reform, dental contract reform. That was the part of the manifesto commitment in 2010. And they did try and do that. I think the issue then was, as you say, pilots turned into prototypes turned into whatever, phase 1, 2, 3. And then eventually, you reached a point where they said, oh, it isn't going to work. There are some fundamental questions I think you got to ask. And one of them is, exactly what that NHS offer should be. What is it that you're looking for it to deliver? And I think that's a perfectly reasonable question for the profession and for patients to be asking. And then the other thing is, quite often we conflate, is it a funding issue or is it a delivery issue? There probably is an element of both. The thing that holds me back from agreeing with your statement about one big change is, as I said, they tried it, but some of the marginal changes that they brought in last year, the first phase of the changes that they brought in, was actually some of the profession was actually trying to raise this in 2014. And that was the issue. And that was roundly rejected, not necessarily by government or the NHS, but roundly rejected by the profession and the representatives of the profession, saying, no, we're not going to do that because you can't, you don't want any small changes. And if you can imagine that even the changes that are, however small they were, probably has made a difference of, I don't know, 5-10% or whatever to people. If that could have been brought in since 2014, it would have made a difference to associates' life in particular, I would say. So the hesitancy is agreeing on, yes, everyone agrees that there's a problem, but not everyone's agreed as to what the solution to that problem is. And it's really difficult to say, we're going to have a big bang. Well, what are you going to big bang it to? There's a responsibility to make sure that works. Who knows that the next big bang evolution, I mean, it could be worse, couldn't it? I mean, because if you don't know what it is, it could be worse, it could be better. So, and as I said, there's no collective responsibility. So I think that we probably have to accept that there is a bigger discussion to be had as to where the NHS sits. How?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's the big one, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the big issue.
You can decide what that's going to be. How do you design a system to deliver it?
But in the meantime, so many stakeholders, aren't there?
Yeah, and in the meantime, don't dismiss everything, from that in terms of changes. I think it's still worth pursuing that kind of change.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean,
And it would be
A to
nice
B.
I was just thinking it'd be nice if we could get to a structure where dentists wanted to work in the NHS. It was back in
Yes.
June, wasn't it? Rishi Sunak said that there was going to be like a lock-in for dentists. I don't like an idea where you get tied into a crap system. I'd much prefer a better system where people want to work in that system, as opposed to you're tied into something because kind of it could be better or it's broken.
Yeah, I mean, I think the commitment was to consult on it, so there wasn't a definite situation. And the question is really what what that sort of looks like and how you're going to implement it. I probably shouldn't say a great deal more, just in case I end up criticising what would be policy. But what I can say is that even back in the day when I qualified, you saw that NHS treatment was predominantly provided by the recently qualified and then those near retirement, and there's a move away sort of in the middle of it. It was interesting at the GDC Leadership Day, our clinical fellow was asked that question. He was sitting on the panel and he said, well, if they brought in that you had to have a minimum commitment of X to the NHS in year 1, year 2, year 3, to be honest, that might already be happening as it stands anyway. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The principle of, you will only solve this issue if you make a system that more people want to work in. It's not missed by policymakers. They are aware that's the case. It's how you make that and what your red lines are. If your red lines are, this is the budget, this is what you do. And this is the other misconception, because I'm getting into giving you my opinion, which I'm happy to give, but actually it's not, strictly speaking, my responsibility to deliver that. That is between government and the British Dental Association. So, it is up to them to articulate and eventually negotiate over what should happen. Because at the end of the day, that I think both must happen, is my view. I think that you need to have a system looking at how you can make improvements that should happen quicker, and then how the big system stuff, how can you make that massive change? And it's quite interesting because the NHS is now responsible for the contract reform piece, but I'm fully aware that the profession will blame the CDO for any shortcomings in that contract reform, and parliamentarians and public will blame government for that reform piece. But actually, I think we all have to get together and try and push that, and that's what I do. I mean, I said it in my first bulletin, so it's not a hidden thing that the pace needs to increase. And that we would all like to see reform. But as I said, the problem is we don't have a concerted view what that looks like.
You've had a whirlwind of a first 6 weeks as interim CDO. As far as the permanent role, you've been asked before about would you do it, wouldn't you do it? But let's assume that you did, because effectively you're holding that position at the moment. What would the cost be to you if you did take that role in terms of your ability to continue to deliver clinical dentistry, the leadership role in your practice, the impact on your family? You said your wife's concerns about, which is probably a care for you as an individual of being in a position where you're going to get slapped left, right, and centre by everybody for everything. If you went into that role, what would be the cost for you for that?
It's true. At least you still be able to get
I think,
because nobody would know the CDO is.
Yeah. I think, that interesting. Yeah, interesting. A really, really good question. As you say, it's. I mean, first and foremost, my wife has to be on board, and I think divorce is off the table now if I did do it. So at least I've got the okay to go, because at one stage it didn't look like that might be the case. So you're right. I mean, the cost is, I suppose. I mean, even cutting down the amount of clinical time in these sort of last 6 weeks, has sort of caused some impact. And sort of I suppose the other aspect of, for me personally, it's the fact of whether I spend time at the practice or whether I spend time in this role. So yeah, it will take some sacrifices, I would think, to do it, but it is a huge honor to do the role. There's no question about that in my mind. So very much, and yeah, being the central attention, which that's the main reason, as you say, that my wife says that what's the point? You'll end up having to sit in a position where the profession will still want to. Parts of the profession, I have to say, we've got a lot of goodwill from a lot of people in the last sort of couple of months, but part of the profession will still want to throw it. So that's a decision to be made. I'll go back to what I said earlier, which is my one driver is, by doing the role, can I try and make changes that I believe that the profession needs and that would benefit patients, and that at the end of the day will be the overwhelming factor. As to whether I can continue, I had a conversation, as I said, about is it all right? I didn't even know initially whether the NHS would be happy with the 4 days, and I was going to keep a part in practice, and that was when I was told that it's not a hindrance, and everything's declared that's absolutely fine. Neither. You were saying that it might be an advantage, and neither is it necessarily an advantage. One of the questions is, if you take on the role longer term, because the work sort of stream is massive, is whether actually is it sustainable to try and keep that? Yeah. Because if you'd asked me as a 20-something-year-old who's taking on the partnership, whether once I've reached over 50, whether I would be working Saturday mornings, I'm pretty sure I'd have said no. I probably thought I'd be retired by now. At the time, and did I think that working 65, 70 hours a week would be the norm once I get to this age? And I probably would have laughed you out of the room. But as it happens,
but you've got a lot of energy,
reality.
Jason, haven't you? You've got a lot of energy, and I think something that's also matched with your energy is you are incredibly optimistic. Your
ridiculously
demeanor,
positive,
ridiculously positive. But your optimism, I think, for the position you've got in dentistry, I think that is critical, because when you got appointed, the overwhelming view from what I saw was people were really supportive of you moving into that position, and I think people do want that optimism and somebody who's going to push for it to get better, and I think you genuinely believe that.
And realism. I think that's what they want. They want a bit of realism that says, okay.
Just finally, we always ask our guests 2 questions at the end. But before we get to that, what makes you happy?
I don't know. I'm spending time with my family, I suppose. I'm also one for sort of ticking things off a list, deleting things off a list. So I have a to-do list, and I get my real achievements when I can. That is done.
And 0.
And on to the next thing. That is done. And be it in practice when I have to write patient letters, and if my list is clear, I go home happy. Are
you old school? Is that a paper with a written list and you put a line through?
No, it's digital, I'm afraid.
Or is it tasks on Outlook or something?
No, not tasks on Outlook. The practice one is on a Word document. This the CDO is on a notepad that is in the cloud. So I have it on my iPad, phone, and laptop, and I go through that
everywhere.
I think it's still, because I agree. I love ticking things off a list, but I don't somehow when it's on a bit of paper and you can literally write a line, put a line through it. That does seem more satisfying.
It is. I'm old school.
Most people think I'm weird when I say that, so I'm really pleased you say that, because when I say that,
I'm the same.
No, good.
No, I get it.
Similar spirits, I think, is the answer.
So our last 2 questions, Jason. The first question we have for you is, if you could be a fly on the wall in a situation and you could be there with somebody watching a scenario play out, where would you like to be given the opportunity?
Wow, that's tricky. So one of my mentors clinically was Mike Wise. I don't know whether you came across Mike Wise. Around many years ago. And Mike, Mike taught me probably at the tail end of his career. I have never met a clinician of his caliber and standard, and I have to say that probably would be watching him work at his prime when he was doing those kind of cases. I just think I've met lots of people, and and there are good people with a skill set, but he always struck me as being someone that is sort of light years ahead. I mean, he never seemed, he just seemed to have the right systems in place and everything. So if I could observe him doing that when he was running his practice and doing that would be quite a good thing for me to see.
Wow.
Brilliant. And the follow-up is, if you could meet somebody, you could sit down and have a cup of coffee, glass of wine.
Living or dead?
Yeah, who would you go for?
That's so difficult. I really haven't. I should have given this some thought perhaps before, but I failed to read the note that you were going to ask me this. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a tricky one. I suppose. I mean, I would go with someone like Barack Obama. I think someone who broke a glass ceiling, and that I would have a sit down with someone like that and just sort of shoot the breeze over certain aspects and attitudes of the world. I think would be it. I think, but as you can imagine, I haven't given this much thought. So you probably give me another year, I'll come back to you with a different answer. But right now, just off the top of my head, I think that
it's
would
Barack.
be the answer. Yeah, it would be.
And I think he would be a fascinating person to talk to.
I think
his book's coming out in 2 parts. I read the first part. Incredible guy. Guy.
Yeah. So I'd be really interested to get inside his head and see what has driven him.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Jason, your time has been very much appreciated. It's been a wonderful conversation. I think just that explanation of your new role and where that sits. But just hearing about your life and your journey and how all these different bits sort of fall into the melting pot of your life.
He's managed to make the CDO role sound quite interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that's a heck
so
of
many
an
diverse
achievement.
elements to it.
Yeah, there you go. Look at that.
That's a heck of an achievement because
Wide and varied, I think, is the answer.
Thank you. No, thanks for the invite. Seriously, it's been
not
fun.
at all.
Yes.
Yeah, no, like I say, really appreciate your time and keep well, Jason. I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Jason.
Right.
Brilliant.
Okay, take care.
Cheers. Thank you for listening to this episode of Dentology, where we discuss the business of dentistry. If you like what you heard, please do subscribe where you found this episode. That would be amazing. And also follow us on Instagram.